All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to LittleSis's Corporate Lobbying 101 training tonight. I would like to thank you all for taking some time out of your evening to join us. Um, and yeah, let's get right into it. Just sort of, I guess, a little bit of housekeeping at first. We are recording this uh, training tonight. You should have gotten a message for that when you signed in. And we will be sending around the recording of this after we conclude tonight. That being said, let's jump right in here. Just by way of introduction, if you're not familiar with LittleSis, or if this is your first time joining us for a training, LittleSis is a watchdog research group. We specialize in what we call power research, which is mapping powerful people and organizations, the corporations, executives, board members, politicians that stand, at the commanding heights of power, sort of intersecting private business and public policy. Three of the main things we do here at LittleSis is we conduct research ourselves and we publish it on our website and blog. We run trainings like the one you're currently in right now, training organizations and general public on how we do power research, as well as sort of our approach to analyzing corporate power. We also we run trainings like this one on how to use open source tools for doing this kind of research. We also run trainings on how to use our littlesis.org database and some of the other tools that we build, which is really kind of the third pillar of what we do at LittleSis. We develop free tools for people to use who are engaged in this power research, whether you are an organizer, an activist, a journalist, or academic. We have two main tools, littlesis.org, which is our database of powerful people and organizations. The idea behind LittleSis is we are the opposite of Big Brother, where the powers that be are watching down on all of us. LittleSis, we think of ourselves as a community of researchers who are collectively looking back up at powerful corporations and the politicians they control. We also have our tool Holographer, which is a visualization tool for building network diagrams and maps of these relationships in order to better communicate power research, and I think sort of visually illustrate the types of relationships that we study and that we report on. Quickly, our agenda for tonight. We're going to start. I will be talking about, in real general terms, talking about what lobbying is, how it works, and why we think it's useful to research corporate lobbying. After that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Ali Shaw, who is going to do a live demo of using two different research tools, the federal lobbying database, which is sort of your primary source. This is where corporate lobbyists submit their required disclosures about their activities, as well as the open secrets database, which aggregates information from the federal lobbying database and sort of assembles it together in a way that is easier to read, and sort of enables us to look at trends across multiple filing periods, looking at different industries and corporations and lobbying firms kind of as a whole, to see to get a more complete picture of what they're doing. And finally, we'll have a brief discussion at the end for different ways that campaigns can use this information that we're going to be talking about accessing tonight. That being said, let's jump right into it. So, what is lobbying? Lobbying is any communication to an executive or legislative branch official related to legislation, a rule or regulation, the administration of a federal program, or the nomination or confirmation of an appointed position. This definition is, sort of paraphrased from the Lobbying Disclosure Act, which is the federal law that regulates these types of communications at the federal government level. In addition to this, pretty much every state has its own laws and regulations regarding lobbying. Tonight, we're really going to be focused on entirely on federal lobbying, and that is just because, well, primarily, I think this is going to be the area of broadest interest, but also every different state, their lobbying regulations work slightly differently. The things that lobbyists are required to report are different state by state, and sometimes city by city when you're talking about some of the larger cities in the United States. And so there just wouldn't be enough time to really cover all 50 states. But I think one thing to keep in mind as we move forward tonight is that pretty much everything we're talking about here is roughly analogous at the state level. Like I said, the exact things that people are required to report are going to be slightly different. The filing periods, how frequently lobbyists have to make these disclosures are going to be different. But in general, what we're talking about is the ways that corporations sort of weigh in on public policy and use their own staff or sort of hired guns to influence policy in a way that's going to be beneficial to the corporation, beneficial to its owners. The sort of the definition I just gave here is I tried to sort of distill it out of the exact legal language from the Lobbying Disclosure Act, but that this itself is already sort of wordy. But these lobbying communications can include all different kinds of things from meetings, phone calls, letters and emails, drafting legislation, but also things like dinners and coffee chats and stuff like this. And actually, there was a really interesting article that was just published today in the American Prospect talking about how big tech company lobbyists really managed to shape their regulatory landscape in Washington, D.C. And one of the lines from this report, I think, really stood out as an illustration of how lobbying works. It can be, these sort of, very formal, meetings in a congressperson's office, or, these kind of like public letters or memos that are sent around. But also, these lobbying happens really, primarily through relationships. So I'm just gonna read a section from this article right here where they say, sometimes meetings are like, hey, let's grab lunch, let's grab coffee and catch up. And half of it is about our kids and half is about, this work related issue. One tech lobbyist told the researcher of this study that they're writing about. We'll have a formal meeting, but obviously we chit chat before and after. A lot of it is just normal human interaction. And within those, normal human interactions, that sort of like building of relationship and rapport, the lobbyists will insert discussion or just sort of make points to try to sort of inculcate and share this worldview from the perspective of the corporations that as we'll talk about, are spending millions of dollars to hire these lobbyists. Also, I want to note that lobbying can have a bunch of different names. When you are looking at the executives or the staff at a corporation, their lobbyists will sometimes be referred to as government relations or government affairs or public policy or public policy advocacy, things like this. There's euphemisms to talk about the work that that lobbying is one major part of. So there we go. On our next slide here, we could see just an example of how big a business lobbying is. So this is a chart from Open Secrets, one of the tools that Allie's going to show you how to use later on tonight. But you can see here that in this chart showing lobbying expenditures from 1998 through 2022, federal lobbying last year exceeded $4 billion. And the little yellow line shows us, how many lobbyists were working in Washington that year, and it's just over 12,000. I want to note that these bars are adjusted for inflation. So, last year we hit an almost, nearly a record high lobbying spending when you adjust for inflation. But with sort of inflation kind of baked into the calculation, the record was really set in 2009, 2010. And if you think about what was going on back then, this is when there were lots of discussions about cap and trade, and then the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, which was, both of those things were, hugely lobbied on issues. One of them eventually ended up actually being passed into legislation. The other one, the cap and trade program, famously didn't. Next table I want to show is this is also from Open Secrets, and this is some of the top lobbying spenders in 2022 last year. You can see like the top spender spent more than $81.7 million on lobbying, and that was the National Association of Realtors. A couple things I want to highlight in this chart is, one, just like the staggering amount of money going into lobbying. Every one of these lobbying clients in this table here, their lobbying expenditures vastly exceeded some of their other kind of political influence strategies. I'm thinking specifically here of campaign donations and outside spending. Preparing for this, I looked up what the campaign donations from affiliates of these groups were, and in every single one of these cases, their lobbying money vastly exceeded the amount that they just spent on making donations to political candidates, or running special issue ads. I think that's important to show just like how critical lobbying is for setting the corporate agenda in Washington, setting the corporate agenda in state houses across the country. Now, keep in mind, this is just federal lobbying spending. The lobbying in the states is a whole other bucket that is not currently included in Open Secrets. So, I mean, if you extrapolate this to 50 states, we're talking about huge sums of money that get spent on influencing politicians to pass laws that benefit corporations, to either enact or not enact regulations that could benefit or harm corporations, to influence judicial appointments and cabinet appointments, and to influence the administration of federal programs. So, how does lobbying work? This is, a really dense, rich topic. I just want everyone to keep in mind, this is kind of we're doing a lobbying 101 here. So we're really kind of talking about like, the clearest examples, and sort of kind of just really setting a scaffolding for understanding lobbying in order to approach researching lobbying. So corporations frequently will have in-house lobbyists, and they will work directly for the company. They work really closely with the legal team and their communications department. And if you think back to that definition of lobbying, that's communicating to federal officials about legislation, rulemaking, etc. In addition to their in-house lobbyists, corporations also might hire lobbying firms to work on their behalf. And lobbying firms could just solely be focused on lobbying, that's making these communications about policy, but they also might be their law firm or their public relations firm. As I'll talk about in just a minute, lobbying is sort of one aspect of the whole kind of corporate influence agenda that, frequently is, baked into a larger strategy that includes things like public relations, political donations, strategic lawsuits, things like that. The last thing I want to touch on is called grassroots lobbying. And what that is when a corporation will, instead of communicating to an elected official or a public official about policy that they either like or don't like, they will communicate to sort of the general public and prompt or induce just members of the public to contact officials and carry on those corporate messages. Now, at the federal level, this kind of grassroots lobbying is not regulated. They don't have to disclose who is running grassroots lobbying campaigns or how much they're spending on them. Now, that is different in some states, like in New York, for example, where I'm from. They corporations have to also disclose their grassroots lobbying expenditures, as well as their sort of more traditional, what you think of as lobbying, the get steak dinners and cigars and brandy and talking policy. So another really key concept in thinking about how lobbying works is called the revolving door. And what the revolving door is think back to, I was talking about how lobbying is really dependent on these relationships. So government officials and their staff can sort of trade on their connections, the inside knowledge they may have accrued while working in the public sector, and become lobbyists once they leave office. As you'll get really clear examples of when Allie's demonstrating the open secrets tool. This is a extremely common, and if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. If you are a corporation looking to influence policy, it makes a lot of sense to hire somebody who has all these connections in government, who may have worked in government for a long time. But one of the implications of this revolving door is that while people are still working in government, there is an incentive to govern for the benefit of corporations who may be their future lobbying clients. This revolving door is a really, I think, key concept to think about and to keep in mind when thinking about how policy is made, and when thinking about what the incentives are for people in government, and how this sort of loop happens of people entering government, governing for the benefit of corporations, then leaving to work for those same corporations, either directly as sort of in-house lobbyists or in-house counsel, or through the huge industry of lobbying firms. Next thing I want to talk about are trade groups and front groups. Now, if you think back to that table of the top lobbying spenders we looked at a few slides ago, 7 out of those 10 were trade groups, representing some industry, or either a specific industry, like the case of like the American Chemical Council, or the sort of the business community as a whole, when you think about like the US Chamber of Commerce or Business Roundtable. These trade groups are basically organizations of corporations, even corporations that might be in competition with one another, that come together in order to sort of pursue and influence policy for the benefit of all the corporations as a whole. So, one of the examples I have on this slide, the American Petroleum Institute, comprises, ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, BP, these really big, oil companies that are in direct competition with one another, but who all want to see, a policy landscape that is, beneficial and gives, special preference to oil drilling and methane gas production. The other sort of piece of this is front groups. So one of the other examples I have on here is the American Clean Skies Foundation. Front groups will frequently have, very sort of innocuous, friendly sounding names like that. In the case of the American Clean Skies Foundation, this is a group created by Chesapeake Energy at the sort of beginning of the fracking boom in the United States. And what its actual, function was to, for one thing, encourage pro-fracking policy by lobbying, by funding scientific studies that say fracking is safe and beneficial, but also to attack the coal industry, which the methane gas producers saw as really a big competition. And so one of the things Clean Skies Foundation really advocated was converting from coal to methane gas for electricity production. But as you sort of try to look into the organization, you see that, oh, this is not about clean skies and pollution and addressing climate change. This is about selling more methane gas and creating a policy that permits the sort of maximal production of of fracking and fracked gas. Oh, wow. Sorry about that. um, so yeah, as I mentioned before, lobbying is one element of corporate influence. So on this little map here that I made using Olographer, our tool that we built with LittleSis, I try to show like various different elements of corporate influence. So lobbying, that sort of again, contacting public officials to try to get them to take a position that you want them to take on a policy issue is one aspect here. But there's also public relations, which is sort of broadly spending money to advertise and to shape public opinion about your industry. The trade groups that I talked about, where different corporations come together to pursue and push sort of mutually beneficial policies. Political donations, of course, I think we all know about that. We all know about how corporations use political action committees and just very wealthy executives and board members to donate huge sums of money to elected officials in order to sort of curry favor with them. And then finally, legal advocacy, and that is using lawyers in the courts to either try to overturn laws that corporations do not like, or to secure interpretations of those laws that benefit those corporations. Now, on this diagram, I kind of show all of these things sort of separated out because they are all slightly different, but in practice, none of these elements are really siloed from one another. They all interact and they all sort of form part of a larger corporate influence strategy. So for example, your public relations firm might do some lobbying on your behalf. This is something we see, in New York State with like the really big PR firm SKD Knickerbocker. They do sort of just general advertising for their clients, but they also will do some lobbying. Or they might run one of these front groups. This is something we've seen a lot in New York with corporate front groups like New Yorkers for Affordable Energy, which is a front for the gas industry, or the Flexible Work for New York, which was a front for the sort of Uber and Lyft and the gig work companies. Also, your law firm that is filing lawsuits on your behalf might be your lobbying firm. And also lobbying firms themselves and individual lobbyists are also really, really big not political donors, and they donate money individually, but they also and this is especially especially important in federal elections and presidential elections, especially, is lobbyists frequently will be big bundlers for political candidates, where they will reach out to their networks and get a bunch of people, their lobbying clients, other people that they know, to all donate money together to a political candidate, which you can imagine If you know that, a particular lobbyist has raised millions of dollars for you, that might be really beneficial in terms of the relationship you have with that lobbyist. Once you're in office and they come knocking on your door and they want to talk shop about the different policies that you may or may not enact as a public official. So why research lobbying? What is the point of all this? I think there's a few reasons. With this research, we can learn the scope of corporate political influence campaigns. We can learn about what corporations' priorities are, how much they're spending, what politicians they're targeting. With that knowledge, we can, combat corporate messaging. We can, we can find out if a company is lobbying on a bill. We can that arms us to to take action in order to counter that messaging. Lobbying research is really important to in terms of combining it with other research, either into political donations, other influence spending, and personal and business networks to get this more complete picture of how corporations, or how like coalitions of corporations are operating and are trying to influence policy. Finally, again, coming back to that revolving door concept, we can learn how former public officials are leveraging their insider positions and the connections that they made after they leave office. And finally, you can just often find surprising information. You might, by doing this research, you might find that a corporation is lobbying on something that that maybe you thought they didn't have anything to do with. All of these things together, really it helps us to again, formulate a bigger, clearer image of what corporations are doing in terms of their influence over the laws, regulations, federal programs that directly impact our lives. And armed with that information, we can better organize to agitate for laws, regulations, federal programs that benefit people instead of these corporations that have millions of dollars to spend on trying to run the show. That was a lot, I know. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to hand it off now to my colleague Allie, who's going to give a brief introduction on how lobbying is regulated, and then start showing actually demonstrating how we do this research at LittleSis. So I'm going to move on to our next slide, mute myself, and hand it off to Allie.
All right, thanks, Rob. Yes, everyone, hi, my name is Allie. I am also a researcher with LittleSis. I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And before I get into doing a demonstration of some of these lobbying databases that we'll go through, I'll go through what these corporations are actually required to report, and then you'll see that in the reporting document that I'll go through. So this is, again, just for federal lobbying regulations. Corporations and their lobbying firms are required to report how much they spent on lobbying. They do that quarterly, so you'll see quarterly reports. The corporation has to report how much they spend, and then the lobbying firms have to report how much they brought in by each client. They have to report what elected officials or government entities were targeted by these corporations, what the subject area or issue they lobbied on was. They have to report the names of each lobbyist for the corporation and that work for their hired lobbying firms. And they also have to report previous elected official or elected office or government positions of those lobbyists. It's a little tricky to find that in the government database, but luckily Open Secrets does a great job of highlighting the revolving door that Rob talked a lot about. And there are plenty of examples to go through. And like Rob mentioned, states are all different. So almost every state has some version of this type of lobbying requirement. It's frustratingly different in each state. It's frustrating to figure out how it's different, and to figure out how to use all the different databases in each state. I live in Pennsylvania, where our lobbying database is not very user-friendly and very hard to get good data from. They don't have to report things like bills that were lobbied on, but they do have to put a picture of each lobbyist in the database, which is just kind of weird and just shows you how different each state is. And it just depends on the state you live in and the local regulations. It also depends on, some cities have their own regulations and their own databases. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that, but you can look into it in your own state and city if you're interested. Maybe that'll be a future training. But for now, I'm going to share my screen so you can see the first demo we're going to do, which is the Lobbying Disclosure Act website. This is lda.senate.gov. Even though it says Senate at the top, this isn't just for the United States Senate. That's just the entity that has to do the reporting. This is all federal lobbying reports. So you can see on the landing page here, it has either search or download these reports. I'm going to go through the search function. If you're interested in downloading, you can try and test out their download function here, but I'm mostly going to talk about the searching quarterly reports and registrations. You can also see this contribution reports button. I'm not going to include that in my demo, but that is political contributions and donations from lobbyists and companies. Donations from the corporate PACs is a little redundant. You can mostly find that information on FEC, the Federal Election Commission's website, in their database. It is interesting to have an easier way to look up lobbyist contributions. Like Rob mentioned, lobbying firms and individual lobbyists are often big donors federally and on a state level. They do that because their number one job is to maintain good relationships with elected officials, government officials. So contributing to their campaigns really helps maintain that relationship. So oftentimes you'll see them making big campaign donations. But mostly we're going to focus on this registration and quarterly report search function. So I'll go through a couple examples of what might be most useful from this function. So you can see we have registrant, client searches, lobbyist search, searching by type of report, affiliated organizations, and foreign entities. I'm going to start with just an example of registrant. So this is just what companies are registered who have lobbyists in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to start with just an example. One of the largest lobbying groups, trade groups for large health insurance companies in the United States, America's Health Insurance Plans. So we're just going to search, and you can see they are definitely registered. One thing you can do that I like is either search or order them by amount spent per year. So you can see this is the top spending quarter, the first quarter of 2022. And kind of compare that to other years. And then you can also sort it by date posted. So that gives you a nice selection of each quarter and each year ordered by year. So that's a pretty straightforward search. You can also clear your search, do the same thing with client. The client search shows you not just the company's reports, but also the reports of all of the lobbying firms that are registered to lobby for that company. So you can see the registrant name brings up the lobbying firm name, and then you can see that their client is the America's Health Insurance Plans. And then you can do the same thing. Actually, you can just kind of see how many lobbying firms that they use. They all have to report separately. And you can do the same thing, just order it by date posted, and it'll give you the most recent reports up here in which lobbying firms were paid the most to do lobbying for this trade group. All of this, these figures here reported by the lobbying firm, that's grouped, that's within this number. So AHIP is reporting how much they spent, the lobbying firms are reporting how much they brought in. Okay, so I also just wanted to quickly show this report search function. It's kind of interesting. If you click on more search options, you can go down and search by issue area. So I'm just gonna look up Medicare and Medicaid, a pretty popular issue area to be lobbied on. Any time that an entity lobbied on them in 2022 in the fourth quarter, which is the most recent reports shown. So you can search and see everyone that lobbied on the issue of Medicare and Medicaid in that quarter. When you can again search by a time frame, but I think it's most interesting to look at the largest lobbying entities or corporations that lobbied on that issue. Now, of course, the Chamber of Commerce lobbied on other issues. This is the total number of their total amount spent on all lobbying, but they did also apparently lobby on Medicare and Medicaid issues. And then you can see some of the big pharma, big insurer groups like Hospital Association, AARP, CVS, Pfizer. So you can kind of compare how much each of these groups is spending on that issue, or not specifically on that issue, but you know that they lobbied on that issue. Another way to sometimes, I've had mixed luck with this, but you can also search in the affiliated organizations tab, and it'll also bring up lobbying groups that are associated with that entity, or other maybe front groups that are associated with that entity, at least that they report. Sometimes the reporting I've found has been a little hit or miss, but it's interesting if you're just doing research on a front group and you want to see if there are corporations that are tied to it or affiliated with it, that might be a good tool to use. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of go through one of the reports. So we're going to go back to America's health insurance plans, look them up in the registrant tab, find their most recent quarter report, and then it'll bring you to a document like this. So you can see kind of basic information up here, their name and address. This is where they report how much was spent that quarter in this expenses column. And then you get down to the actual issues that they lobbied on. So I picked this AHIP group because they are basically, they solely exist to lobby on these issues in Washington. And they have to report the bills lobbied on and the issues lobbied on. They're grouped by issue category, and they have these codes. You can see this tiny number 15 here, general issue area code. There is a site where you can see what each code means. It's easiest to just Google LDA, lobbying area codes or issue area codes. HCR is healthcare. And then you can see that they list all of the different bills that they lobbied on that quarter. So this is just one quarter, and they do a lot of work because they have a lot of lobbyists. You can see the name of that bill, the representative that sponsors it, and what the bill is about, just a really brief summary. And then down here, you can see where they list some other regulatory issues that they've lobbied on. I won't go too far into this paragraph. Number 17 is where they report the entities that they met with and lobbied. So you can see, obviously, the US Senate, US House, the Department of Treasury, Office of Management and Budget, DHS, the White House. Pretty much covers anything that would have anything to do with healthcare in Washington, D.C. You can see the lists of each individual lobbyist that lobbied in that issue area. And then it starts over again with the new issue area, this one, MMM, being Medicare and Medicaid. And the same thing, listing bills. These bills probably overlap with the other issue areas. One thing I wanted to mention here is that you can see that they do say that they lobby on issues related to Medicare for all. One of the frustrating things, and it's probably the number one question that I get asked when I tell people that I research lobbying, is that they want to know what these companies are talking to their elected officials about, what they're actually lobbying on. And they unfortunately do not have to say what position they're taking on a specific bill or issue. That's true in Pennsylvania as well. But you can infer some things like, we know these big insurers are against Medicare for all. They say that pretty explicitly in their communications. AHIP, their trade group, says that on their website, or at least I assume that they say it in a lot of their communications, so they put out into the public. So when they say they lobby on issues related to Medicare for all, you can pretty safely assume that they mean they're against Medicare for all. Some of these aren't as clear, but this is a good indication that they are still talking about Medicare for all in the last quarter of 2022 to elected officials in Congress, even though it's not currently, up for discussion or in danger of being passed. So this format repeats for different area codes. This one is insurance, slightly fewer bills. The last one is pharmacy. You can see different lobbyists being listed. And then the last one is taxes. And we'll get into different ways that you can see all the bills or all the issues that different companies are lobbying on. Open Secrets has an easier way to look at that, but mostly these quarterly reports don't have anything filled out in the affiliated organizations column. That's usually in registration forms. So this is one of their quarterly reports, an example of it. I'm now going to go back to the search and show you a registration form, because that has some different information on it that could be helpful. So I'm going to switch it up and go to the financial industry, JP Morgan. Oh, and I'm actually just looking for a registration document. So I'm going to go down here to report. You can go to report type, just put in registration. So it'll take out all the quarterly reports. I don't have to comb through it. I just want to see JP Morgan's registration document. And they'll have a bunch of amendments, but this is a good example to just show you what one of those looks like. So you can see same thing, registrant, their address. The most important thing here is not only do they have to list the issues that they typically lobby on, but they also have to list each of their lobbyists. And in this column over here, covered official position is where they have to report the previous government jobs that they held. So you can see, for example, this person, Jack Bartling, was a legislative assistant in Congress, was the deputy assistant secretary in the Department of Treasury, and was also counsel for the Financial Services Committee, also I assume in Congress. So it makes sense that person was hired by JP Morgan to lobby his former employees on financial services issues. This is just one example. More lobbyists are listed down here, and additional lobbyists. I don't know why it's separate, but you can see almost all of them have had previous government positions, and this is extremely common. Not just JP Morgan, but all companies. It's a good investment for them to hire people that already have existing relationships in the bodies that they're trying to lobby. Okay, that is it for LDA. I'm going to go to a site that's a little easier to maneuver. You're thinking, I don't want to go through each individual company's quarterly activity report, read all that kind of hard to find information. There must be a better way. And there is. It's called opensecrets.com or .org. Usually people use this for campaign donations, but it's actually also a really good resource for lobbying information. I'm going to start by showing you where Rob got some of the cool graphs that he showed you earlier. So if you go up to this lobbying tab, at the top right-hand corner and go to lobbying overview, you can see some of these ways that Open Secrets has taken all of that information from the federal lobbying database and combined it to make it easy for researchers and the general public to see what corporations are doing to lobby our elected officials. So one of or a couple tabs that I like the most is top spenders. This is what Rob showed you earlier. You can see where he got this information. The National Association of Realtors is the top spender. You can also sort this by year, so you can compare it year over year. So last year was the Chamber of Commerce. I really like that they have this 1998 through 2022 tab. It gives you how much each of these groups has spent in that wide span of time. And it was kind of wild to me that the US Chamber of Commerce has spent $1.8 billion since 1998 on lobbying, far and away more than any other group. So that's just an unfathomable amount of money. You can see the top lobbying firms, so who got paid the most by corporations to lobby. I'll come back to what we can do if we look into each of those lobbying firms. You can see top issues that were lobbied on in a given year, number of lobbyists that worked on that, number of clients that listed that as an issue area that they lobbied on. I also personally just appreciate them grouping this information together. So this is comparing corporate lobbying spending versus labor and other ideological lobbying. An argument that I've heard against any sort of lobbying regulations is that, oh, well, both sides do it, big labor does it, corporations do it, so why regulate it? Because, it affects everyone. And this just shows that the sheer amount of money that corporations put into lobbying vastly outweighs any other lobbying that's being done in Washington. So now we're going to go to searching actual companies. So I was going to start with Pfizer, big pharmaceutical company. So if you search Pfizer, you can come down and see, if you search any company, you can see a tab that says Pfizer lobbying profile. So I'm going to go to that, and it brings up their client profile and all the information that Open Secrets has on lobbying. So you can select by year. I'm going to go to 2022, so last year. So this has it broken down pretty nicely. You can see that Pfizer spent over $14 million on total lobbying expenditures. This includes subsidiaries, which I like. It's annoying to have to find out what subsidiaries of a company are and combine them to your total. You can see a graph of their spending by quarter over the past couple decades. Their related organizations that they had to report in their lobbying reports, and lobbying by industry. So this is the summary tab. You can go up here. I'll just go through all these tabs to show you what you can find in this profile. This is hired lobbying firms. So this is all the lobbying firms that Pfizer used in 2022 and how much they spent on them. You can also see individual lobbyists. So this is all on the right-hand side, the names of the lobbyists that are hired by these firms that represent Pfizer. These lobbyists all probably have a couple, maybe a couple dozen clients, corporate clients that they lobby for, but Pfizer is one of them. So you can see just how many firms and lobbyists there are. You can also search by each lobbyist has this little, or the ones that are implicated in this, have a little icon right here, the revolving door icon. This means that lobbyist held a previous government or elected official position or government position. If they have a icon like this, they are a former member of Congress. I'll go through a couple examples of those. But for right now, I'm going to search You can search by people that have revolving door profiles or not, or people that are former members of Congress or not. So I'm going to search by members of Congress. There is one person that's a Pfizer lobbyist that used to be in Congress. So you can go to her profile, Anne Marie Burkle. And I really like that you can see what their other clients are. You can also go to their former member of Congress profile. And she was only in Congress, it seems like, for one term, but you can go to career and it'll actually show you who their top contributors were over their career in Congress. And it's really interesting to see, who their top contributors were, who their top industries, or, what industries their top contributors were in, and compare that to who they lobby for now. So it's really interesting just to kind of go through, and you can also go to the contributors tab and look at all their contributors. So we're gonna just go back real quick. I'll show you a better example of this, but you can also click on the revolving door profile and it'll give you a little graphic of what positions they've held over their career. Again, this is extremely common. So almost all of these lobbyists have a graph that looks something like this. So you can see not only was she a representative in the United States Congress, but she worked in the state of New York under the Assistant Attorney General, or was the Assistant Attorney General, was also a commissioner, and then became a lobbyist. Okay, so we're just going to go back to Pfizer's profile, so I can show you the rest of the tabs here really quick. So you can go to the issues tab and see, remember the codes that I showed you under, the report has them break down the bills they lobbied on by code. So this is the issues that they lobbied on the most. You can sort them by number of times that those were listed on their report. So obviously health issues is number one for Pfizer. But like Rob said, you can find some surprising things, like they lobbied on an issue related to defense, apparently law enforcement and crime. So you can kind of sometimes be surprised on what companies lobby on. You can find, just like that information we saw in the report, you can find what entities were lobbied by Pfizer for that year. And then you can also see, again, a breakdown of the individual bills that were lobbied on and how many times those bills showed up in their quarterly report. So the Inflation Reduction Act was one of the most lobbied on bills last year, not surprising because it actually did pass and became law. So that made it more urgent for these companies to spend money to lobby the Senate and House on what actually went into that bill. And then if you need to cite your sources and feel like you want the original document, they have this report images tab where you can go and actually just say, oh, where can I find supporting documentation for this figure? It'll take you to the report that we just looked up in the Senate database. So that makes it pretty easy if you just want to cite your sources from the original source. And then one more thing that I wanted to show you on Open Secrets, when I go back to the lobbying overview. So if you go to top lobbying firms, it's sometimes interesting to just kind of check out who is actually lobbying for these top firms. So these are the firms with the biggest clients that get the most money. So obviously they hire lobbyists that are worth that money. So you wouldn't be surprised that there are several members of Congress that are hired by these lobbying firms. So I'm gonna go to, hold on. This guy, Jeff Burr. I thought he was an interesting example because he lobbies for Uber, General Motors, FedEx, some really big companies here. And if you go to his lobbying or his revolving door profile from the lobbying firm Brownstein and Hyatt. You can see his timeline laid out here pretty well, and he has quite the employment history. Worked for the Department of Labor and the Department of Transportation, and then back to the Department of Labor. So it's not surprising that out of the Department of Labor, where he was the chief of staff, he is now lobbying for Uber, FedEx, General Motors, Cars.com. That's another example of they hire lobbyists because they have relationships at those agencies. And then you can see another common example of the revolving door is lobbyists are often either previously or are appointed to transition teams. You see this on a federal level, but also in states. Our governor in Pennsylvania hired several lobbyists to lead his transition team when he had to start making appointments to his cabinet. It's pretty common to see lobbyists on presidential or other transition teams. And I think that's where I'm going to stop, but I will say Open Secrets is pretty fun if you have time to just poke around and look through it. You can find a lot of good information about campaign donations, but also lobbying and other interest groups. And I'm going to pass it back over to Rob.
Great, thanks a lot, Ellie. There's a lot of really great information there. I'm going to quickly switch back to our slideshow here and talk about a little bit about how campaigns can use this research. And I think with lobbying, this is like an example of where it's not like exactly obvious, how you might take information about who is being hired by corporations to influence policy, how much they're getting paid. And I think this is something where this lobbying research is best deployed in conjunction with other research. I mean, I think with just sort of the lobbying research, I think this can best inform maybe like a strategy where you're trying to work with a reporter to get some sort of a media report about like just what a corporation or what a special interest is doing in terms of how much they are spending on political influence. I've seen this done with a lot of campaigns. So for example, here we've got a tweet from Housing Justice for All, a coalition based in New York State, talking about how the landlord lobby spent the most out of any lobbying interest in New York State or in New York City in order to defeat a good cause eviction. I kind of cropped it out in order to fit more things on here, but this included like a link to a news story about the landlord lobby's lobbying activities. Another thing you might do with this information is to use the fact that that successful lobbying is all relationship dependent in order to kind of have some sort of a splashy or public demonstration or direct action that calls attention to the sort of the influence of lobbyists, and especially lobbyist relationships with a politician who you might be trying to move on a certain issue. So for example, here I've got a little video from New York Communities for Change where they crashed and interrupted former Governor's Cuomo's birthday fundraiser, which for folks who aren't from New York, this was like a huge fundraising event every year. I think he would usually get like Billy Joel to perform at it. And this is where, all kinds of like corporate executives, but also lobbyists would come together, give tens of thousands of dollars to Cuomo's campaigns because, campaign donation limits are really high in New York State. And, New York Communities for Change, just barged right in, carrying the message to tax the rich. And this was part of the Make Billionaires Pay campaign in late 2019. This kind of direct action, it's I think these kind of actions can be really galvanizing for a specific campaign. It can really, I think, make lobbyists and policymakers can kind of put them on notice that you're watching what they're doing. But it also is like another way to, I think, drive a media cycle around around whatever the objective of a campaign might be. We've also seen people use information about lobbying and lobbyists for I guess I don't want to say for unrelated campaigns, but for example, if you were running some like a divestment campaign or some other maybe corporate focused campaign on a college or university campus, it would be it could be very interesting and for your campaign to find out whether there are lobbyists on the university board of trustees or board of directors, something like that. Yeah, I guess like in all, I want to say, again, it comes back to, I think, one, kind of forming this larger, more complete picture about what a corporation's priorities are, who they're hiring, what their networks are. These big lobbying firms, especially in law schools, and especially sort of like elite or Ivy League law schools, that's where they draw all their talent from. I think, I'm aware of campaigns. I'm going to forget which law school it was where law school students basically said, we are not going to go work for big law firms that represent the oil industry. And so, using lobbying research is one, major way where you can find out if a law firm or if, a prospective employer who might be recruiting on your campus is representing, oil or, big tech or any one of these, major industries that exerts huge amounts of control and domination over our lives. I'm looking at the time now. It's 8:02, so I want to I want to sort of respect everyone's time, give let you enjoy some of your evenings again. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A here. We're not going to be able to get to those tonight, but I want to say Ellie's email address and my email address are up on this slide here. Definitely, please feel free to reach out to us via email with some of these questions that we haven't gotten to, or if you have other questions about lobbying and just some sort of additional resources. We have our Map the Power toolkit at littlesis.org/toolkit, which includes some sort of documentation and training materials for doing a bunch of different kind of aspects of this power research, from researching corporate filings to nonprofits to political donations to lobbying. You can also sign up for our newsletter at littlesis.org/newsletter. There you'll get periodic emails. I swear we do not send them very frequently. We're not going to fill you up with spam whatsoever, but you will get emails, for example, about the next training that we're running, which it escapes me right now what our May training is going to be. Allie, do you remember that by any chance?
I thought maybe it was the Police Foundation training in 990s.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, we're going to be running a training next month on researching police foundations. Those are, the private nonprofit corporations where, all sorts of corporations come together to donate huge amounts of money unaccountably to municipal police departments outside of the just natural, budget process, which, you can imagine might, curry all kinds of favor when it comes to what policing priorities are. finally, you can check out our YouTube channel. We have lots of instructional videos on various different power research methods, as well as how to use LittleSis's tools. Again, thank you all so much for taking some time to spend with us this evening. Really appreciate it. We had I think up to like 39 people here, which is just really awesome. And yeah, definitely please reach out if you've got any other questions. Saying that, I'll say good night to you all now. Take care.
Bye.